thing on? All right, good. All right, I will try to make this good. I know this is the last presentation between you guys and some beers, so I'm trying to make it good. Yeah, my name is Ken Westin, and I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'm going to be talking to you guys about some things that I did prior to my job at Splunk. I actually worked and developed various tools and technologies to actually track criminals. I'll talk about some of those cases, but also talk about some of the theory and some of the things I learned as well, actually doing some of these investigations. So I've been doing security for about 18 years. I'm trained in both offensive and defensive security. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's there. If you want to send me hate mail and death threats, there's my Gmail account. I developed a number of tracking technologies and tools. Some of them are actually, I got 2 patents that were issued. I actually had a startup as a result of it. It allowed me some freedom to actually explore and actually start to develop and leverage some of the technologies that hackers were actually using to do malicious things, but actually turn the tables and actually leverage those technologies and actually help people to fight crime, to help recover your devices if they're stolen. And through that process, I actually learned quite a bit. I actually built another search engine that actually tracks and looks at image metadata. You heard Sarah talking earlier about dark web and some of the things you can do with exif data. I actually built a search engine that actually mined a lot of the information, and I'll talk about how that actually came to be and how we actually use that information to solve crimes. I ended up assisting and training law enforcement in how to use open source intelligence for investigations. When they get data like we would collect from devices, how do we make use of this information? So I ended up kind of holding their hand through a lot of this stuff. As you can imagine, sometimes law enforcement is not particularly savvy when it comes to technology, and I tried to help bridge that gap. It was a little frustrating at times, but I feel like I did some good work there. I ended up putting a lot of bad people in jail, probably about several dozen people actually, with the data that I actually collected, actually led to a number of convictions. Not only did I recover stolen devices, but usually I would also identify other crimes that are being committed. We would actually unveil large organized crime rings. Particularly in Portland, Oregon, there seem to be a lot of organized groups that are tied to Russian groups. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well when we actually go into some of those cases. I'm currently at Splunk, and I focused on helping organizations with security analytics. I love data, especially when we're talking about hunting and things like that. I really enjoy it. I do a lot of work with Insider Threat. Actually, about 2 years ago, I presented up here, or a different location for VSize Vancouver. I talked about Insider Threat with my friend Irfan. And I just to kind of let you guys know too, a lot of this is my own independent research. It's not tied to my employer, especially the things I'm going to be talking about. These are things that I did well before my employment, all right? So, all right, put that out there. HR is watching, right? Good. I actually did this presentation, some of the material at DEF CON 23, and I got a lot of media attention. I was actually called a professional cyber stalker. It's not too bad. I got called the real-life Mr. Robot. That pissed me off. Oregon was a little nicer. The Oregon Business Magazine called me the good hacker. So next year I'm going to be doing a presentation about how to make yourself a target for being doxxed, and that's how I'll start it. So these are what I call my wall of shame. These are actually photos that were captured from devices or people that actually recovered their devices as a result of some of the technologies I used. This is just some of the ones I can actually talk about. I blurred out the faces to protect the guilty, and we'll talk about some of those cases and why I actually do that. Some of them aren't blurred out. Not everyone likes the work I've done. I thought this was kind of awesome, actually. I actually applied to speak at Black Hat to talk about this stuff, and one of the reviewers said, I think you should reflect on the ethical implications of the technology you're happily distributing. And it's important that, that kind of hurt my feelings, right? Because what I want to do is actually take this technology and actually help people with it. Not only help you recover devices, but also help people understand that these are the tools and technologies that criminals are using to track you, right? So that was my whole goal with this stuff. So anyway, it made me a sad panda, but I got over it, and I presented at DEF CON that year, which was way better. So some things you'll kind of see this pattern is when Raphael was up here, he was talking a lot about machine learning and leveraging data science and artificial intelligence and things like that. And when you're dealing with criminals, there's something you need to take into account, right? We need to understand that there's also real stupidity, right? Not artificial intelligence, but people will make mistakes. And these are 3 things that I find that usually leads criminals to get caught. And the FBI, law enforcement, they rely on this as well. A lot of times they don't know how to solve a crime, but then they get lucky because someone screws up. So greed's the main one. Usually when someone's committing a crime and they start to make money from it, they're going to start getting sloppy. They're going to start taking additional risk, and with that, it's going to lead to additional mistakes. Pride, a lot of arrogance. Sometimes it's people just having a false sense of security that, hey, they haven't been caught yet. There's no way they're going to be able to track me. Another is just being lazy, right? We see that not just in criminals, but we see that in some of our environments in our corporations, right, with our users. But those are things to remember. So if you are considering a life of crime, just take this into account. So a lot of the work I did, I was always trying to understand, what is it that I'm looking for? There's sort of this underlying theme. And there was this guy named Eben Lecard, and he's a French forensic scientist. He was actually one of the first forensic scientists there was. A lot of the things we have, this is even before fingerprints and things like that. He had these sort of theories, and it sort of led to things like we saw with DNA and fingerprints and things that are actually used in forensics and crimes. And of course, he was talking about physical crimes. The idea is that when you commit a crime, you take something with you and you leave something behind. And it's referred now as Lockhart's exchange principle. And I believe this actually carries over into the digital world as well. The trick is being able to identify where that data is and how to log that information. And sometimes it's in places you would never expect. And I'll talk about that in some of the investigations. So we talk about data, and there can be little pieces of data. It can start with a social security number. We can look at IP addresses. We can look at device IDs. We look at phone number, geolocation. There's all these little pieces of data. And a lot of times that data on itself, by itself doesn't mean anything. It doesn't actually identify an individual. It might identify a device. But some magical things happen when we start to do correlation. When we start looking at all these different data points that actually make that up, we can actually start to actually develop a profile of an individual. And we can actually even identify who that person is. And sometimes we don't have all the evidence, but this can be enough for probable cause to actually dig deeper into investigations, and I'll show you some examples of that. So we look at all the different things. We talk about our laptops, our devices. We hear a lot about Internet of Things, and people are always worried about, oh, they're going to hack my refrigerator or maybe our microwave, right? Because they're doing surveillance on us now. But I think the bigger problem here is the information that that's gathering. That data is being gathered, and a lot of times it's being stored in the cloud. And a lot of times it's these companies that are actually developing these tools, and they're not actually taking security seriously. And there's all this information that's actually available, so if it does get breached, there are ways to draw these correlations and actually start to identify patterns and behaviors. Things I've actually identified, it can be everything from what you like to do, your running patterns and things like that. All that information can be useful if someone's actually trying to profile and identify you. So these are called crazy walls. Anyone watch CSI? Probably seen these, right? So the whole idea here is that you're gathering evidence and you're doing it over a timeline and you're drawing the connections, right? And so that's what we're doing in the virtual world. And when we talk about machine learning too and security, that's really what we're just trying to help leverage that technology to actually help us identify these patterns in data. Because that's what it's all about. It's identifying patterns. And if you're a hunter in an environment or if you're doing this type of work, you sort of have this innate gift of actually identifying these patterns and maybe seeing things that other people don't see. And that's probably why a lot of you are in this field. Just to give you a little example, me and one of my peers, we actually got tasked on a national TV show called Crime Watch Daily. They said there was a $6 million smart home that was unhackable. Challenge accepted. We were able to hack into the home because the Wi-Fi password was actually the guy's cell phone number. Okay, the people that set this up, they didn't actually set the Wi-Fi password, he did. But once we got inside, we found that everything else had default passwords. We were able to monitor all the different devices, and everything was still using the default passwords. So I got into the surveillance cameras. We did all these different sorts of things. And then for dramatic effect, if you guys want to watch the video, I'm not going to play it here, but they had a party that night. We had 24 hours to hack it. We got everything into it we could, and then we started fucking with them. We turned the lights off. We lowered the curtains. We projected the security camera footage onto the TV. We started showing all the people's faces that were at the party, scaring the crap out of them. And then we piped in some audio too. It was a computer-generated voice, Mr. Robotish, that talked about how we hacked them and stuff like that. It was fun. But it just goes to show that just a little piece of information, right? And we even talked about things we could have done there too. I had access to his computer. Like I got into his file share, I was able to access some of his information, and that's where we stopped. We said, we're not going to go any farther than there. We told him about what we could access, and we didn't leave that environment until we actually made sure that it was secure. So, So we talk about the interactive things a lot of times when data gets collected. So there is data that's created by us, and this is data that we actually have control of, right? So information that we're aware of that, we can delete emails and things like that, and we feel like we have some control of that data. But as we do that, there's also data that's created for us. So your stock portfolio, when you access your medical records, when you look at any sort of analytics tools, right, this is generated for us. We don't have a lot of control of that. We may be able to delete some of it, but how far can we go? Then there's data that's created about us, and a lot of times we don't even know about this, right? I actually talked a lot with the FBI and investigators. They say people think we collect all this information about people. It's like, no, we go to companies. The marketing department, they're the ones that have all the information about people. So when we talk about breaches of that kind of data, right, how important is security to those organizations? They're trying to make a quick buck. They're trying to profile people. They're using machine learning. They're doing all these sorts of things. But how is that information protected? Usually it's not secured at all. And then it gets even scarier, what I call boogie data. People talk about data exhaust, things like that. And this is where we start looking at maybe log data that may have some information that can identify you. It can also consist of breach data. So information that you may not even know that's been breached, that's actually being sold in underground markets and things like that. We talked a little bit about darknets earlier. Yeah, Michael Myers, got to throw in there, scary. So give you an example. Just one thing I want to say is, what do you guys think is the best way to secure your customer data? Amen. Stop fucking collecting it, right? We don't need to store it. If you don't need to collect that information, there's no business purpose for it, don't collect it. And if you do need to collect it, encrypt it, hash it, do something you can to protect that information. Not only are you protecting your customers, but you're also protecting your organization from liability. If there is a breach of that information, when that gets out, was that part of your privacy policy? Were people aware that you're collecting that information, right? A lot of times, people in business, they may not even understand how that information can be used against people. And it may not be that data. If you correlate that with additional information, like your flight information, with your medical information, your history, OPM, anybody? Right, how can that information be used against people? Just something to consider. I'll give you an example. Ashley Madison. I actually helped an organization with an investigation. They actually had some suspicions about a particular executive in the organization, and then someone was searching around and they found that, hey, our company name is actually in the data file, and this is one particular individual. He made the mistake of using the billing address of the company. He used the email address of the corporation, and then dumb shit even used the corporate debit card, right? So usually the company wouldn't be able to do anything, right? And it's, hey, whatever you do it's your own business. Legally we can't do anything here. Hey, it's between you and your family. But the fact that he was using this information, their corporate assets, that became a bigger issue. So we were able to look at things where they had billing address, they had the last digits of the credit card number, and there's even a defense where they can say, well, someone used my email address and they registered as me. Problem is, we also had VPN logs where it actually logged his IP address. The Ashley Madison data also had the IP address of when that actually occurred. So then you also have the timestamps that go along with that, right? Busted. So we were able to correlate the IP address with the VPN, and there was also some endpoint logs. He actually had created a shadow corporate account. He was kind of pretty savvy when it came to finance, almost kind of white-collar types of fraud. And he was actually had a lot of other expenses. So this led to a larger investigation. It got board approval as well. They found that he was actually using this account to pay for golf. He was paying for bar bills, all sorts of different things. A lot of other things I won't even go into. But just to give you an example of when that data gets breached, right? Ashley Madison, they even told people that, hey, we're going to delete your information. He even tried that in the last transaction. He tried to delete the account, right? But this information was still there. So that's a violation of trust. Also, I helped with another thing. It was actually a Telmex. It's the largest provider in Mexico. They actually acquired a company called Prodigy, which was one of the biggest email providers at the time. But they did not keep the servers patched. They didn't kind of configure things correctly. And as a result, a lot of the emails that were in this one particular account were actually getting indexed by Google. So I worked with the organization to clean up the misconfiguration, and I also helped make sure that that information got removed from Google. But a lot of the data we actually pulled from here, you're finding like bank statements, a lot of other information. And that's kind of scary in a place like Mexico where some of this information can be used against people, right? So you never know when your email provider might make a misconfiguration, your data can all of a sudden be public. So just something to think about. So I'm going to change a little, go back into some of the actual tools that I built, focusing more on the endpoint and recovering stolen devices. I got really interested in USB-based Trojans. I actually developed a website called USB Hacks. You can actually download some of these tools I'll talk about going to usbhacks.zip on the usbhacks.com. You're going to get an error, of course, that says that it's malware, because it is, just so you know. I have to put it out there because people say like, hey, I get this weird alert. No shit. But there's a number of exploit tools that are available there. You know, these are sort of old, like 2008, 2009, when I was experimenting with these. But I was really interested in how these were actually being used. I'm a lazy hacker. Like, trying to hack from outside, that's really difficult. But if you're inside an organization, holy crap, it was so easy. You know, you can deploy all sorts of malware to the organization. You can download data. All these tools just made it super simple. And so what I did was I worked on my my master's dissertation, where I was like, what if I can take some of these tools that have malicious purpose and actually, you know, make them a good thing? So what I did was I took these USB-based Trojans and I made them a happy little Trojan, right? So you plug that into a device. If, let's say that device gets stolen, it hijacks the computer it's connected to. It then sends information out to a remote server, so we're able to get information like IP address, name of the person that's logged in, and some other data. Just started out as an experiment. I didn't think it was going to be anything. I offered it for free. You know, back then it was dig.com for you millennials. That's like Reddit, but back in the day. And it got dug to death. The site went down because it was on a shared host. But I got it back up and running. You know, modified it some more, and actually found and actually used that data that I was bringing in to identify all the different types of devices that this would actually use. Basically, anything that had USB map storage, I was able to track. And I developed a startup around this as well. So this is pretty simple. It's taking advantage of vulnerability within Windows. You can actually download the source code for the initial USB client that I developed. If you want to actually pick it apart, it's in C++. But it really leveraged a lot of the auto-run capabilities. I also social engineered it, so the file would also look like a passwords file and things like that, so someone would be more likely to click on it. But again, this would hijack the computer it's connected to. Again, careful when you download the code. I'm not going to repair any of your computers. So you think like USB, it's you know that's kind of old and done with. But you know we've seen it again. The Stuxnet virus, it was initially delivered via USB. It's particularly when you look at industrial environments or you look at medical environments too. There's still a lot of Windows XP systems that are still there and still vulnerable. It's still a target. And we've still seen this even today. Even in 2017, we're still seeing this. If you guys are familiar now with Bash Bunny, it's on Hack 5. I have mine on order. It's being shipped. It should be there when I get home. But basically, it's the commoditization of these USB hacks, and there's a number of them that are available. And there's a lot of really interesting things you can do with these types of tools for $100, right? So, you know, your people that are going to be targeting your organization have access to these tools as well. So it might be good for you to kind of play with these tools within your environment, see if you can detect them. So there's a problem with IP address when we're doing these recoveries. A lot of times I would get the username of the person, so that would be helpful evidence. But you know, if you have an IP address, it required a lot of work from law enforcement. It's a lot of paperwork. It's no identity, so it doesn't actually put the person in front of the computer. Probable cause is also a big challenge. It's not always accurate. It takes a really long time, legal process, and law enforcement is generally apathetic, or they're busy with other things, more violent crimes, for example. So the first iPod recovery I had, we got a connection, and you know the username was Galapagos Family, and there was only one person in that particular organization that actually had that last name. So that was a very simple one. Just gives you an idea. It's like if you have IP address and you have additional information, you want to collect as much as you possibly can. Then I got approached by a company that makes thermal imaging cameras, and they had a problem because these devices cost anywhere from like $5,000 to $300,000. They also had issue with these devices because some of them were export controlled. They weren't allowed in certain countries. And so there what we did was we built a special version of the software that would actually rewrite itself. So if, for example, they removed the SD card and they put a new one in, the firmware would see, hey, this is a new SD card. It would redeploy the Trojan, right? So if someone does connect that to a camera, then we're able to get the location. And we got some interesting things. Some devices showed up in the Middle East that shouldn't have been. There were some IDs that we also attached to that as well, so we can identify the distributor, right? So there's some interesting things you can do there as well. That organization lost their business. I also disguised the Trojan as a thermal image itself, and that's the one I used right there. That's my cat. His name was Nobby. So I'm going to go on a quick tangent too. Is like, well, these are all Windows. But what about Mac? When I actually worked on this presentation for DEF CON a couple years ago, I actually found some old source code, and I brought it back out. How you can actually develop a similar tool for Mac products. So I'm going to talk about how to build a USB Trojan for Mac. So I used AppleScript. Why? Because it's trusted. AppleScript is trusted by all the different applications in the operating system. I'm also an incredibly shitty and lazy coder. I'm not going to learn Objective-C or Swift or whatever the hell it is now. But AppleScript, and though it's a real pain in the ass to work with, at least I know that it's trusted and it's scripted, and I can easily develop tools for it. And one thing I found was that OS X has a little security thing where if you put like a .mp3, it'll throw a .app on the end to tell people it's like, this isn't an MP3, this is an application. So what I did was, there's these things called homoglyphs. All right, nobody chuckled. All right, you guys are all over 12. So I use this character called an ogonek. It's a Turkish character. It looks like a period with a little tiny tail, but users can't see it. If you threw that on the end and threw .mp3, then it wouldn't throw the .app on it. So I told Apple about this. They said it wasn't a vulnerability, so I'm now publicly talking about it. But this is kind of what the contents of it looks like. Somehow I was able to actually take that script and make it useful. And here's the actual code. And if you guys want to, you can't see it. I'm sorry, because it's kind of small here, but it's on my github.com/kwestin/AppleRazor. And you can actually download the actual code, and you compile it out. But the idea here is I'd actually use sysinfo object and some other things that actually have available to gather information about the system, the user that's on that system. I got really frustrated because I was able to open up a web browser and I could exfil data through the query string, but it's really obvious to the user. So I'm like, hey, instead I'm going to use iTunes, right? So that's what I do here is I tell application iTunes to activate, and then I want it to open up this URL. And in that URL, I pass all the data through the query string. And then when it does that ping out, then it responds back with an MP3 file. So they think when they clicked on the MP3, they're actually listening to an MP3. And usually I know when people are actually downloading this in the presentation because I used the Rickroll song, right? So someone starts playing with it in the audience and anyway. But yeah, and then down here you can also do shell scripts. You can call a lot of other things too. So this was an exploit when I released it DEF CON for Mac that can do some nasty stuff. But just be careful with it. And people will ask about Gatekeeper. Yes, Gatekeeper will block this now, but back in the day they didn't have Gatekeeper. But a lot of times I found users don't always have Gatekeeper enabled, so that might be something you can leverage or take advantage of. And I've also heard that there might be a bypass. So kind of getting back to this, when I started actually doing a lot of recoveries, it's not just the machine data itself, but we had one device that was pinging out. We're getting IP address for AT&T. But then we also got a connection to a computer lab at the University of North Texas. The flash drive was actually belonged to a professor. He has a bunch of research on it, and it got stolen from him. He wanted it back. That's why he had our software installed on the device. So we tracked it to this computer lab, and then we talked to the campus security, and we found that, okay, well, we have a timestamp of when that device was plugged in. We also found out that the organization had a number of laptops that were stolen, so they actually had required a student badge to be swiped in. So we had badge information in the log data as well. And then we also found that they had security cameras as well. So we were able to sync that with the timestamp, and we were able to identify who actually had that flash drive when we got it back for the professor. So it's just an example of a lot of times you need to think about all the different data sources you may have available to you when you're doing these types of investigations. If you get stumped, just ask around, see what other information might be available. So after that, I actually thought about how can I actually use this technology to actually recover stolen laptops themselves. At the time, there were a number of tools that actually can do theft recovery, but a lot of them I didn't trust because they provided a backdoor into the system, and I was a little nervous about that. But I said, it's my device. What if we can develop a tool that I can track that? So what I did was I was able to leverage the web camera, which wasn't particularly new, but when we combined that with geolocation, so this is around when the first iPhone came out, and it was using Skyhook wireless. It was actually using Wi-Fi to get location. So I approached them, and I got access to their API, and was able to use it for theft recovery into a tool. And it gets us within 10 to 20 meters, which is perfect for what we're trying to do with theft recovery. So we would capture a photo of the person that stole the computer. We would get the location of them, and we would send it to them every 15 minutes or so. And we were able to monitor that, the activity of the device. So if a laptop got stolen, we could actually identify, who actually had it. And at the time, I didn't want to build the infrastructure, the back end, so I actually just attached it into Flickr. So if you had a Flickr account, you would have your laptop. If it gets stolen, you activate tracking, and then that data would go automatically into your Flickr account as private, and then you could provide that to law enforcement. And it worked really well. So we used a wireless. Now, pretty much every device has location based into it. You can actually access it through most APIs and most scripts. So you could home grow this now. Even the Google Maps API, you can get location data from that as well. Here's the first recovery I actually had. It was an iMac that was stolen in New York, along with a bunch of photo equipment. And you'll see in the background, there's all kinds of really other cool stuff this guy has. He has a lot of really cool toys. The police went in, and I swear to God, the police officer, he'd worked with some of these other tools, and he was like, great, now I got to do all this paperwork. And he's calling me. He's like, you got to, I have to get the information. I'm like, no, I have location. Look at the report. You have the location, and he didn't believe me, And so I said, no, believe me. Print the photo out, go to the location, ask around if anyone has seen this guy. And he's like, don't tell me how to do my job, all right? But then he did it. And he got the recovery. And this guy was actually a tattoo shop owner, and this is like his back office, and he was actually fencing a lot of other stolen property. And after that, then we're like, he wanted to be my best friend, and next time I'm in New York, we're going to go see a baseball game or something. So it was cool. Another one we had was in Portland, Oregon. All of a sudden, a lot of the schools in Portland were getting hit. A lot of laptops were getting stolen. So I actually approached them. I said, let me help you guys out. We deployed our software on a number of bait laptops that weren't locked up. It was weird. Like, they would get stolen, they would replace them, and then 2 weeks later, these people would come in and steal them again. It was crazy. So we did start getting connections from one of them. We got the data, and then we actually mapped it out. It was actually in a house in Vancouver. I had to work with the police on this one in Vancouver, and it was frustrating because I gave them the address. It's within 10 to 20 meters. They go to the location, and the police officer knocks on this guy's door, and the guy opens the door. He knew him. This guy, it's a guy that works on his roof. And he's like, this guy's not the criminal. Your technology doesn't work. I got pissed off. I'm like, fuck you. Yes, it does. So I drove out there, and I had my laptop, and I was looking at the Wi-Fi networks, verifying that the data I had was correct. And then I swear to God, out of the door, there's the guy. This guy right here, he walks out of his door. He's in the duplex right next door, right? And there's the network we had said Russian pride, something or other, and on the bumper of his car was this thing about Russia, right? So I'm like, great. So then I called the police. They came out, and and they said, yeah, this is great. Now we can actually follow it up. And it's like, it's a good thing that he didn't see you, because he's got his friend across the street that lives close by, and he's bad news. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, he got out of prison. He almost tried to kill someone. I'm like, all right, thanks, guys. That was awesome. But anyway, I learned a lot from that. Like, don't get too involved. Another one we had was Victor. There was a laptop that got stolen. We didn't hear anything from it for like 2 weeks. I got really pissed off. I'm like, great, our technology doesn't work. Maybe they reformatted it for parts or something like that. And then all of a sudden, I started getting pings from like Missouri, of all places. And it was this guy, and I was tracking him all over. I saw him in a McDonald's. He was in a hotel with some girl in the back doing God knows what. He was everywhere. And we had a lot of information on him. The nice thing that he really did, I'm going to step out of my box, sorry, is that he changed the username to his full name. So remember I talked about the vulnerabilities, the stupid? Yeah, that's one of them, right? So if you steal a laptop, don't put your full name as a username, okay? All right. So from that, I was able to go to MySpace. I saw he was a really big Scion car fan. I found that his username mapped to a bunch of car forums. So it was really cool, too, is I also had his license plate number. That was really nice of him to take a photo of his license plate for me. He was selling a lot of parts on eBay for cars. So, again, what kind of business is he involved in? And then he ended up, he was a nice guy. He sold the laptop along with a stolen bike to his friend. And what happened is that his dad is actually the one that gave him the laptop. And what was happening was they were actually loading up a bunch of stolen property into a van in Portland, and then they would ship it to Missouri. They would then load up a bunch of stolen property there and ship it back to Portland. Because if your stuff gets stolen, where's the first place you're going to look? Craigslist, right? So that's what they were trying to do, and they did all this thing. And it was his birthday, and his dad gave him a stolen laptop. Yeah, that's sweet. It's really sweet. And a criminal record. Thanks, Dad. We had another one was more violent. It was a carjacking in Brazil. It was actually a veterinary student, and these guys put a gun to them, and they said, get out of the car, smashed the guy that was the driver, his friend, broke his nose, and they took off, and they brought the laptop with them. We were able to get these photos, provided the information to the police, and they were able to get the laptop back. This was a good one, too, because he was a veterinary student. You know, he had a bunch of his final work on there. It was his final year. He didn't have it backed up. So I felt pretty good about this. And we also, you know, got the guy that broke his friend's nose. So then I looked at how can we apply this to the mobile side. So the geolocation became a lot easier when we looked at mobile devices. The IP address is a little more problematic because it keeps changing with the different carriers. We then also wanted to do photo and contact backups for the devices. We find that people don't really care about the value of the phone. They can get a new one, but they care about the data. But I didn't want to have unencrypted data. I was really nervous. What if I get hacked? I'm very paranoid, right? What does that mean for our customers? So we actually developed technology where you would install the software, you would enter a privacy key that only you knew that would then encrypt the data, and when it gets uploaded, you can download it, and then you would enter that encryption key, and it would decrypt the data. So that way, even if the FBI came to us and say, we need all these guys' photos, here's your encrypted blob, now you need to go and go talk to them about getting the key. We're hands off, and if we do get breached, we wouldn't have these sort of, the fappening types of situations where backed up information becomes compromised. And I'm going to play a video here. Hopefully this works. This is actually, this technology got deployed to a number of wireless stores. They actually deployed them to their demo units. And so let's make sure this works. Of course it's not going to work. Hold on. Try it again here. Hold on.
That's helping track them down. News Channel 8 said Teachout spent the past 2 days with police and investigators on the trail of swiped cell phones. He's live outside the Washington Square Mall where the theft took place at.
Well, the managers of the Sprint store here at the Washington Square Mall behind me say they're very confident that tracking software developed only miles away from here and put onto their demo phones will lead to an arrest.
They stole several phones.
This is a $500 phone. This ended up being a $450 phone.
2 empty display cradles are all that remains after someone stole 2 demo cell phones from the Sprint store at Washington Square Mall
we also
on
had
Saturday.
the security footage of them
Moments after
actually
surveillance video caught the theft on tape, employees initiated
and then they were able to activate the tracking for the phones.
Stolen phones.
We were able to not only find the GPS location of the individuals that took them, but also we've been able to
it looks like there was
monitor
also
any
a group who was
activity that
doing this
happens
to a
in
lot
the
of other
phone.
wireless
That
stores in the Portland area.
turned out to be pictures someone took shortly after the phones
nice thing
were
is
stolen.
they took photos of themselves.
Tigard police admit it's a brave new world when pictures taken on cell phones can be told to send back pictures once they're stolen.
Nice thing is, you'll see on the back of one of them
the interest of our investigators, but in essence appears at this point could be very credible information for us to follow up on.
The Portland creator of the software tracking the theft says police are on the right track.
If they're not the thieves, they definitely know who stole it.
And if you look over the head of this man, you'll see in the window an Oregon temporary permit.
Philip, this is Ed.
With the help of a gadget track investigator on the phone, we
tracked
the stolen phone signal to this Vancouver apartment complex. There we found the exact temporary permit and
police aren't following up with something you want to do, maybe call an investigative
a young
reporter.
woman who
That
told us
usually
off
wakes the
camera
police up
a man
little
she
bit.
called Peter
That was the girl
had
he
sent
the
this
photos
photo
to.
to her Saturday evening, but says she knew nothing about the phones.
This is where we actually tracked the other phone.
We tracked the second cell phone signal to this duplex about 8 blocks away.
You don't have a Samsung Epic phone in this
Police
location?
were here the other day looking for it.
Police were here yesterday looking for it.
Anyway, I'll skip this. So it just gives you an idea is that, we had the surveillance camera. We had a lot of information. For whatever reason, the phone, it wasn't sending the location data as we needed, but we were able to still get the location data from the photos themselves because I had exif data in it. So we had the GPS coordinates of where that phone was taken and a timestamp. That was really helpful for the investigation. Of course, having that as well, the trip permit, that's just gravy. They ended up getting these guys, and there was about 6 or 7 people that were actually involved in this particular group. They even recovered a stolen car. This wasn't the car that was recovered, but one of these guys had already had a warrant out for his arrest. So again, we unveiled a larger crime ring. And so when I was doing this too, is there's a lot of data that's associated with that are actually embedded in images. You know, it's not just within cell phones where you have GPS coordinates. You have timestamp. I also found that in higher end digital cameras, it would embed the make, model, as well as the serial number of the camera, right? So that was really interesting to me. And I was like, what if there was a way I could search for the serial number of a camera to see, you know, identify all of the photos that were taken by a particular camera. And I actually found that these are all the different makes and models of the cameras that actually will embed the serial number of the camera in the EXIF data. A good example was a reporter actually reached out to me, you know, when celebrities had some of their photos compromised, Scarlett Johansson. I had to download the images, I had to research people. Keep it clean, keep it clean. Media was saying that the phone was hacked, when in actuality, if we actually look at the EXIF data, it actually reveals that it was from multiple phones over the course of several years. And it was actually, the point of compromise was email, was this guy, Chris Cheney. He's now serving 10 years in jail because, you know, he was guessing the passwords. The passwords weren't particularly complex, and that's how he was able to get access to the images. So then I thought, you know, there's got to be a way to mine this EXIF data. So at the time, I was working with a friend of mine who had a startup. It was called CP Usage, and they actually had sort of like the SETI at home model, right? So instead of volunteering your computer time, we would actually pay you for your computer time. So I had access to like 500 to 1,000 computers. So what we did was we got around Flickr. I was trying to use just the API, and of course it limits how many requests you can make. I got pissed off. I'm like, there's got to be a way around it. That's what I want to mine. So I used those 500 computers from all these different computer labs from like universities and other places all around the world. And then we started mining the Flickr data. We were able to do, I think it was like 5 billion images within about 2 or 3 weeks. We were able to grab it also from other sites like 500px, Panoromeo, TwitPic. I found that Twitter will actually scrub the EXIF data from images you upload, but a lot of the profile images still had the EXIF data. It was really weird. You'd find these tiny little thumbnails, and there'd just be tons of EXIF data, including GPS coordinates and serial numbers and all sorts of interesting things. So we mine that as well, just for research. So the way it works is we would mine these sites. We would actually download the data. We would have this information. We then put it into a database. And then again, I launched it as a free product. You could just do a quick search of the serial number, and then we'll show you all the different photos we actually found that were actually taken with that particular camera. And we actually started getting recoveries. It got featured in New York Times and The Economist and some other publications. Some photographers heard about it. This one guy, John Heller, he had a camera stolen about a year prior. He did a search and he got a hit on Flickr. We then were able to map that username to another account on Facebook. And it was a guy who was also a professional photographer who just happened to have photos of all of his gear. And there was his camera. He was like, that's my camera. He contacted the police. They got involved. And what happened was he was at the Egyptian Theater, and it's about like $7,000 worth of camera equipment. He was on assignment for Getty Images, and he turned around to talk to someone, turned back around, all of his gear's gone, right? That's for an independent contractor, $6,000 to $7,000 worth of camera equipment. It's pretty scary. So the guy stole it. He then sold it to someone on Craigslist, and then he sold it to someone on eBay. And so what we were able to do is actually track this guy who had it on Facebook. He bought it from someone on eBay. The police went to that guy on eBay. I bought it from a guy on Craigslist. Okay, what was the address? They went to that guy's address. This is a year after the camera was stolen. They go back to this guy's apartment and they find all kinds of other stolen property, right? So he got busted. Bad thing is the guy that had it on at the end there, he didn't commit a crime, but he was in possession of stolen property. So he did have to hire an attorney just to make sure that all this stuff got worked out. But first recovery of its kind, just using a little bit of data, EXIF data, right? So this put people on notice that a camera can be tracked, right, if it gets stolen a year, 2 years, 3 years later. And that guy got arrested. There's a copy of the receipt. So we had a few of these other ones. Another one, a guy tried to sell a camera on Craigslist, and you know, he looked it up, and there was a case where he was showing someone the camera out in his garage, and then this other guy drove up in his car. The guy that he was showing it to popped him in the face, knocked him to the ground, took the camera, ran off, and then so we're able to identify who had it. And it was this guy, and we had his name, identified his business. He was a professional photographer and DJ. He had addresses we had from domain registrations. I was able to get his cell phone number from his ads as well. Identified all of his social media and photo sharing accounts. He had about 12 different high-end cameras that he would get every 12 months. So we actually mined all of his images that he was posting. So he was trying to like do this with girls, like, hey, if you want to be a model, I'm a professional photographer, that sort of thing. But he had tons of photos. Some photos he probably shouldn't be taking. So he had photos of his marijuana. He had a photo of him holding a firearm up to his head there. There wasn't a license. There was no registered firearms under his name when we talked to police. He liked to take photos of him and his friends smoking marijuana, as well as going to a concert. I think it was a Jay-Z concert or something. They're smoking weed on the way, looking at the date stamp. And just a note, if you are going to take a photo of yourself smoking weed, make sure you don't take a photo of your speedometer going 110 miles an hour. Because then we had geolocation, timestamp, and everything that we was doing. So the police really liked this when we gave them all this information, right? All sorts of probable cause and interesting things you learn about people. And so this technology was actually was approached by ICE, and there was a child exploitation investigation unit, and they wanted access to this via API. The idea here is that, you know, Joe Sicko, he's taking photos of kids and he's uploading them to darknets, right? So those images may have exif data still in them with serial numbers. And we may be able to match that up with maybe that same camera that's being used at Flickr when he's taking a photo with his family at Disneyland, right? So they were actually using that API. They couldn't tell me if they caught anybody, but just giving them free access, and I'm hoping that maybe if they got 1 or 2 guys with it, that'd be great. I also went to a Thorn. It's a hackathon with Facebook and Thorn. And one of the challenges with this is that sometimes the police will come, they'll see a phone, or they'll have an image that may have been sent to a kid on social media, but they don't have time to do a forensic image of that device. It can take months or even longer than that. What this allows them to do is actually be on that device right immediately. They can actually upload an image to this tool, exif.io, and it'll tell them if there's any GPS coordinates, serial numbers, anything that's identifiable in that image. And they can do it from a mobile phone, and they can do it from a laptop as well. So sort of a simple solution, but it's something that's being used by law enforcement. And that was it. Man, I was right on 45 minutes, so I have a little bit of time for questions. So, or do you guys just want to go drink beer? Right there. You have a microphone? Sure, you can scream and I'll repeat it.
So would any one of you guys experts think or investigate what's going on now with Russians? And would you agree that at least professional state-sponsored hackers from foreign country would not probably leave obvious signs that they are involved in it? Or is anyone looking at this from a professional side? So I'm looking at TV and stuff, it's like, come on, it's so obvious. Are you guys involved in that, and do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, I don't, no comment. I don't get involved in the nation state stuff. That scares the crap out of me. When I was involved in some of this stuff.
Just simplify, I don't want to go in details, but like really, anyone here can probably agree, if I'm a professional hacker on that level, I would probably not leave my own signature in that software itself.
Right.
That's kind of sounds ridiculous.
But there's always
no experts are standing up and saying so.
Right. There's always, you know, you're always looking for someone to make a mistake. I've been involved in other types of investigations that are more like intrusions and things like that. And you know, you talk about attribution and things like that. It's a lot harder to prove. But you can start to look at some of the larger campaigns, incorporating threat intelligence, additional data sources. You can start to make assumptions, right? But you're not going to be able to actually prosecute them or get all the evidence unless you get the other nation states actually involved to actually help with that investigation, right? So a business, they can only do so much. The FBI can only do so much. If some of these countries they're not working with us and they're not willing to participate, then you can only your investigation is only going to go so far, unfortunately. Right.
Yeah, so you mentioned with Twitter, they seem to scrub exif data. That seems to be becoming more popular with stuff like Imager.com. Does scrubbing exif data on image hosts like that thwart some of your efforts?
Yeah, for this, but one thing I did learn in one investigation, I won't say which social media platform, but that information is still stored. So you can, if you believe that there might be evidence associated with an investigation, you can actually go to some of these providers. They either have the original image uploaded somewhere, or they've actually extracted a lot of that EXIF data. I actually found that a lot of the data that's in the images, it does have marketing use, looking at GPS coordinates, things like that, make, model, a camera. So some of those organizations are harvesting that information. It's available either in a database or they have the original image. So if you're in the FBI or someone like that, they have access to that information still. So if you're involved in crimes, you want to make sure you scrub the image before you upload it to a website.
Hey.
They already know this.
Oh, I'm just going to ask this question here. Thanks, Todd. That was an awesome presentation. There's a couple buzzwords you didn't talk about, and I'm just kind of curious how these figure into your work. Namely MAC addresses and IMEI numbers in phones and laptops and stuff. How accessible are those to forensic departments? Are they just staying on the router and therefore they're not going over the wires, so you just can't really do anything with them? Or is there ways to work with those?
Yeah, we include those, and we included that in the software. We get the MAC address for systems, we get the IMEI, the IMSI, all that information. Anything that's available in the SIM card, we're able to pull. Yeah, we have access to all that data. And it's in the reports. So. We got another guy here.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Two mics. You guys are surprising me.
Just a quick question. The problem with the exif tool is that when you create a Snapchat, or not Snapchat, it's screenshot from the picture, then you have no data or metadata of that picture. So is there any idea how to, do you have any idea how to overcome that problem?
So the question was regarding if you can, it's pretty easy. You can easily scrub information from images. You can also take a screenshot of the image, right? So that was your question. It removes all the data. Well, there's other technologies that are available for that. If you look at Microsoft Photo DNA, they're doing some really interesting things, particularly for identifying, they call innocent images. So even if you take a screenshot of it, there's ways they can actually look at the image itself, and there's some really interesting things. That hackathon I went to, there was a bunch of data scientists. We had data scientists from our team there, and they were showing all these really cool things. The guys that actually did this stuff where they're actually looking at, when you go to a hotel, take a photo of the bed sheets and everything like that and upload it, and they're able to use machine learning to identify, these images. They can see what, if it's a Holiday Inn in Texas or something like that, they could identify some of that. So there's a lot of really cool things in the images themselves, but that's for people that are way smarter than I am, so.
Yeah, you just mentioned or alluded to this in your previous response, but I was wondering what your experience was with the various image recognition engines. There's so many more of them making themselves available, and they're growing in performance and maturity and affordability. So have you started to integrate those tools into the work that you're doing, or it's still early days?
Well, I've seen a lot of really interesting things on the machine learning side with the images, kind of what you're talking about too, with the photo DNA and things like that. And that kind of gets beyond what I do. I deal with just data. I'm really bad at math, so I'm good at investigations. I might leverage some of those tools to do an investigation, but yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff that's happening. That's again, it's kind of beyond my skill set.
Hi. Why is it that you don't like being compared to a real life Mr. Robot?
Yeah, I'm not that smart. So that's the thing is a lot of this stuff, I kind of stumbled into it. I didn't really create a lot of these tools. I sort of had theories, and I tie things together, right? There's got to be a way to bring this data together. I'm trained in defensive security and things like that. But yeah, when someone starts calling you Mr. Robot, you're like, come on, fuck off. All right, any more questions? Cool. I'll be around, so if you want to talk to me some more, I'm more than happy to answer more questions. Cool. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.